Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. You know, there are 5 books of Moses. The first one is Genesis, second one is Exodus, third is Leviticus, fourth is Numbers, fifth is Deuteronomy. What does Deuteronomy mean? It means the law repeated again. And actually what Deuteronomy is about the speeches of Moses saying goodbye to the Jewish people. And he reviews what happened, you know, when he took them out of Egypt, what they did in the desert and so on. For instance, the 10 commandments are repeated in Deuteronomy. First time they appear in the book of Exodus. Now in the book of Deuteronomy, they are repeated again. But when one looks at the text, there are some slight differences. And I want to delve on one particular difference. In the book of Exodus, it says the following: Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. Remember the Sabbath day. In the book of Deuteronomy, it says, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. Keep, guard the Sabbath day. A different expression. As a matter of fact, those of the Jewish faith who go to the synagogue on Friday night, they know in a very famous poem called Lecha Dodi, Come My Beloved, you say Shamor veZachor bedibur echad. That these 2 words, keep and remember, were said with one expression. This is something that only God can do. In other words, God said both words at the same time, except that we hear them differently. But he pronounced them at the same time. That's something that only he can do. And for those who follow the Jewish tradition, I want to tell you, it says Shamor veZachor. Shamor is really the one from Deuteronomy. Zachor is the one from Exodus. So the poem should have said Zachor veShamor, not Shamor veZachor. Why is that so? The answer is because the name of the author appears as the first letter of each stanza. His name was Shlomo HaLevi. And if you would have said Zachor veShamor, the first letter of his name wouldn't appear. The first letter of his name is a Shin, that is from the word Shamor. But that is literary license that the author, of course, took. I'm just giving to you as a point of interest. But in any event, why the difference? What is the difference? Well, when you read the text, in Exodus it says the following: remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You know why? Because God created the world in 6 days, and he rested on the 7th day. Therefore, you have to rest on the 7th day. So what are you commemorating by observing the Shabbat, by ceasing from work? You're commemorating the fact that God created the world. In Deuteronomy, it says, observe, keep the laws of the Shabbat. You know why? Because God took you out of Egypt. You know, in Egypt, you couldn't stop working on the Sabbath. A slave has to do whatever his master says. So the Sabbath enables you, the fact that God took you out of Egypt, you are now able to fulfill the laws of the Sabbath of not working. So when you compare the 2 texts, you know, the first one is like a universal text. You know, remember the Sabbath day because God created the world in 6 days. That's for everybody. But when you read the second text, keep the Sabbath day because you were taken out of slavery, that seems to be like a Jewish text. In a sense, they're both really universal. The first text tells you the following: God rested on the 7th day, so you have to stop creating on the 7th day. Stop working, because the real creator of this universe is God. And you, by observing the Sabbath, you acknowledge that the one who can really create things out of nothing, because what man does is transform. He takes matter in his hand and he does something with it. He mines the earth and finds silver, he finds gold, he finds iron. He manipulates these things, but he has to start with something. God started with nothing. He made the world out of nothing. What is this Big Bang when the world was created, the universe? Well, who knows what existed before? Maybe time didn't exist either. Time is something of this universe. So you acknowledge God as the creator. It's a universal, a cosmic type of vision of why you observe the Sabbath. The second one, I said, is a national one of the Jewish people. But yet that was the cry of liberty, not only for the Jews. Because people used to believe that if you are born a slave, you live like a slave and you die like a slave. That is your destiny. You can't change it. But Judaism came and said, no. The fact that you are a slave does not mean that you have to remain a slave for the rest of your life. And that is an example for all other nations, not only for the Jewish people. You know, the pilgrims, the Englishmen that came to the United States crossing the ocean, they thought of themselves as if they're crossing the Red Sea. They are now getting away from slavery, and they're coming to a land where they're going to be free. In other words, this isn't only for the Jewish people, it's for the entire world. So the Bible really has a cosmic view, namely God is the creator of the universe, but at the same time it also guards human freedom. And this is contained in the repetition of the Ten Commandments, the one we find in Genesis and the one we find in Exodus and the one we find in Deuteronomy.